Hey there, this is Fritz Westover, your viticulturist at Virtual Viticulture Academy, and also your host at the Vineyard Underground podcast. Thanks for those of you who've been checking in and listening there as we give advice and interview experts from around the globe on winemaking and wine growing tips for you and your vineyard. So I'm going to go into a question today that I got from a grower in Georgia, Susan. And we're just going to go ahead and do a share here so you can see exactly what the question was here. But this question has some great photos with it. And it's a question I know a lot of you out there who grow in wooded areas have dealt with. So this one's about deer damage. Susan asked, or rather states, I didn't order enough netting, so the deer are munching on some of my crimson cab that's growing out of the grow tubes. The first picture is how pretty it looked before they were eating these grapes, and then after versus the ones they're eating closer to the forest. So we've got before on the left here, showing the grapes growing beautiful out of the grow tubes. And then what happened was the deer came out and saw, Susan, that you planted a salad bar essentially, and it was unprotected. You didn't have a second grow tube to protect this, or you didn't have netting to go over top to protect, which is very common. So they go through and they basically feed down as much as they can and eat everything off the top of the vine down to the top of the tube. And that's what these two pictures on the right are showing. So Susan's question is, what happens now to the vines that the deer have damaged? So Susan, the good news is you've had very healthy growth leading up to when the deer came into the vineyard. I'm sorry they did this to you, but let me explain a little bit about the physiology behind how this affects your vines for the remainder of the season or even into next year. So what happens is your vines are growing in these grow tubes. They can be paper tubes or plastic ones like you're showing here. It doesn't matter. They're going to grow and eventually grow out of those tubes. And you've done a very good job at tying your vines up straight, keeping them growing so you can try to get a trunk. And what I always say is it's very difficult and very rare to get a trunk in the first growing season. Of course, there are some growers who can do it, but your objective is really to grow one big shoot that produces, or two, that produce a lot of leaves. And the leaves at the tip of that shoot are the ones that are actually sinks for resources. And any laterals that grow out of that shoot are going to be a sink for resources, such as carbohydrates, sugars. And these leaves down lower that are outside of the tube, but very large, these are your fully mature contributing leaves. So these are the leaves in here that are going to be feeding not only the shoot tip, but any laterals that might grow, and to feed the thickness of that cane or that shoot, we're going to call it, that's being grown as a potential trunk in this case. So when a deer comes along, you have to imagine there's all these leaves there that are actively producing sugars and carbohydrates. Those are in turn going down to your roots. And it's very important to establish your roots that first growing season. So those leaves are what are feeding your roots. So you get to this point and you've fed your roots with these leaves, and then a deer comes along and eats all of these healthy, productive, fully mature leaves. And now what's going to happen is your vine is going to push new growth. Okay, but what you've done is you've taken away the source. You've taken away the solar panels, if you will, off of that vine that were producing that sunlight, or taking that sunlight and producing carbohydrates to feed your root system. So the process is stalled once these deer have fed on this vine, and you basically are in a waiting period. And what you're waiting for is for the carbohydrate reserves from the roots and these actively growing leaves here, which are probably going to do most of the work. They're going to push laterals. You can see some small lateral tissue and new leaf tips or shoot tips growing here at the base of the shoots where they were chewed. These were your lateral shoots, and they are now pushing and will become a bush kind of effect above that grow tube. So you're going to have 3, 4, 5 shoots formed from laterals. Now, the laterals are a sink for carbohydrates. So they're going to tax the vine, and you're going to stop overall net accumulation of carbohydrates moving into next year, but you can still recover some tissue and continue to grow the vine so that you can get back into the position where hopefully this season you have mature producing leaves. Now, number one, the first thing you want to do is protect these shoots. So try to get that netting so you can put it down the sides of your vines or drape it over the top, whatever it is, or use deer fencing. I know you don't have that in place or you wouldn't have this issue, but you can still net Or you can add a second grow tube, or you can move the grow tube up a little bit to protect the shoot tips. There's a few things you can do. You have to look at your overall strategy to see what's going to work best for you. But you definitely want to protect the new growth, because if deer come in a second or third time and chew off all of your new growth, then you've used reserve carbohydrates to produce new growth that was not ever contributing to the vine. So it sets you back yet another step in terms of carbohydrate reserves. And that is not good for going in for winter dormancy or for potential for vigor and capacity for your vine for next year. So protect the shoots before they get chewed on by a deer. Obviously, it's too late for some of your vines. So you're going to go in and protect the new regrowth that comes. And you could add a small amount of fertilizer and, of course, water to your vines. I see you have irrigation, but you can add a small amount of nitrogen or a broad spectrum fertilizer. Not too much late in the summer, maybe the equivalent of 5 to 7 pounds of nitrogen per acre through the drip irrigation or as a ground application. And that's pounds of actual nitrogen per acre. You could put down as possibly a way to stimulate your new growth and compensate for some of that loss. If you're getting too close to leaf drop, probably I would not fertilize. But anyway, I wanted to give a little bit more detailed response to this rather than just say, you'll be fine, cover them up, water them and fertilize them. Don't worry about it. I want you all to listen to this, get an idea of the physiology behind what's happening, and understand what the true consequences are, or even if there are any or not. And in the end, in this vineyard, because it's a first year vineyard, your goal next year during winter pruning, so let's say in North America, that's January, February, March, your pruning season, you're going to cut all these vines back down to 2 buds close to the ground. And that's the year in year 2 where you're going to grow your trunk. So it's very important that you have netting in place by next year so that the deer don't eat your vine when you're trying to produce that very, very important trunk. So you're still in good shape. You have time to intervene. I think this is going to be a very good example that's going to help others, Susan. So thanks for submitting your question. And if you, the listener, would like to get more information to help you become a better grape grower, just visit virtualviticultureacademy.com and you can find information. Click the Learn tab, go to Grower Guides. There's plenty of free resources there and videos, or however you like to get your viticulture information. If you prefer to listen in and learn from a podcast, check out vineyardundergroundpodcast.com or look up Vineyard Underground Podcast wherever you get your podcast. This is Fritz Westover, hoping you're going to be a better grape grower by listening to this today. Ciao, ciao.